There's the record button. There we go. Would you be able to read determinism as the negative debater? Yes. I would say determinism is about 85% of the time read on the negative. Uh, yeah, perfect. Miss Lily Sella answered it. Yes, about 85% of the time, determinism is read as a negative off case position, meaning that in like the same way you would read like a counterplan, you would read determinism as more of like an ethical theory than anything else. Uh, I was just saying the other option to read that, if you want to read it on the affirmative, is reading it under some sort of moral framework. You can also do that on the negative, reading it as a framework justification and then going for it in a later speech, like the 1AR, 2NR. Uh, yeah, cool. Anybody? Hopefully, we're all good on that. Everybody understand like the different ways you can read determinism, different arguments you can go for, stuff like that. Well, I guess not arguments you can go for. That's what we're about to get into. Everyone type one if you understand different ways to read determinism.
I have like a quick question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, how do you put it as a framework justification again? Like, I low-key missed that because I was multitasking.
Yeah, no, you're all good. It's also hot in here. Give me a sec. Yeah. So as a framework justification, I read it mostly. Stand by. The way I read it mostly was I would read a Kant framework and then read it as a justification as to why morality has to be a priori. Uh, does everyone know what a priori means? Hopefully. But basically, you would read it as like morality has to be a priori because the world is predetermined. Therefore, no other framework makes sense. And then off of that, if they don't answer that in the next speech, or what they do a lot of the time, and I actually have won several rounds off of this, is if you read the world is predetermined because, or sorry, the world is causally predetermined, therefore morality must begin a priori. In the 1 and C, uh, the debater will very often give you a bunch of reasons as to why morality doesn't begin a priori, but then won't answer determinism. So then you can go, okay, fine, morality doesn't begin a priori. You can concede to their framework, but then use determinism as an independent reason their framework fails. Does that kind of answer your question? Let's see, we got another question here. How does determinism justify a priori morality? Would it not say morality doesn't exist? Well, that's a good question. So kind of, but not really. Um, Morality not existing is a separate warrant from determinism, right? So, as an example of this, Kant, everyone's favorite moral philosopher, actually wrote quite a bit about how about how determinism justified the categorical imperative, and a lot of like modern Kantian authors will also argue this. That yeah, if the world were to be predetermined, only Kant would make sense, right? Because in a world that is fully predetermined, you can't have a consequentialist based framework because every consequence was already predetermined, right? So there's no like ethical value to that consequence because everyone already knew it was coming. And not that everyone knew it was coming, but that it was coming regardless. Uh, okay, cool. We got a couple people already answering in the chat, which is, oh, that's Rihanna. Hi, Rihanna. Um, so only a priori morality can be compatibilist. Okay, well, Lily Stella, you're asking a lot of really good questions. We're gonna get into them in just a second. But yes, the idea is that a priori morality would be like compatibilistic. Util debaters will also make like compatibilistic arguments, um, but they all suck. So we'll kind of get into those a little bit later. Uh, cool. So does everybody kind of generally understand determinism, the ways you can read determinism, and how it can kind of be how it can show up in the round? Type one, if you understand how determinism can show up in the round. Type two, if you're like, wow, this guy sucks. Why did I sign up for this lecture? A lot of ones. That's what we like to see. All right, Rihanna, that's enough. Who hearted that? Are you kidding me? uh, anyways, okay, perfect. Okay, we're gonna go into some of the like determinism justifications and brief explanations of them. Hopefully, you guys are taking notes because this section would be a little difficult to just kind of hear and memorize. So we're going to go through some of them. So determinism justifications. These are the interesting thing about determinism, and one of the things that I really like about it is that determinism is read basically as a collection of nibs. I'm going to assume not everybody knows what a nib is. A nib is a necessary but insufficient burden, right? Which basically means that it's an argument that your opponent has to answer, but even if they outright win that argument, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the round, right? So an example of a nib would be a lot of tricks, right? So for example, if you were to say, like, uh, some random nib, like rules don't apply to everyone, therefore we can't know the rules of debate, right? Your opponent has to answer that because otherwise it would make like affirming impossible. But them answering that doesn't win them the round. So that's what a nib is. Determinism is kind of read as a collection of necessary but insufficient burdens, with each new warrant being a new necessary but insufficient burden. Um, However, I'll also explain to you guys how to not lose to that sort of theory argument in a second. Um, but yeah, so each justification is different, each justification is unique, and you can go for each justification independently of any of the other justifications. For example, if you read 4 justifications and you lose 3 of them, you can still very easily win determinism. You only need to win 1. Cool. Any questions? Anything like that? Look at the chat for like 10 seconds. Hopefully we're all doing okay. Perfect. Okay, I think that means everyone's doing okay because I don't see any questions. So different justifications. One of, and probably the best determinism justification, just because it is so incredibly difficult to disprove and to answer, is it's called time relativity theory. So let's see, type of 1 in the chat if you've heard of like Einstein's thing where he's like, if you send one twin into outer space and leave another twin on Earth, then like by the time the one from space gets back, they'll be older. Has everyone heard of that? Type of 1 in the chat if you've heard of that. Okay, a lot of people have heard about that. So hopefully you guys know what I'm talking about. Um, that's basically what this time relativity theory argument is. Is it's basically, let's see, we'll start from like the Einstein thing. So Einstein has his theory of relativity. That's something you've all probably heard, but a lot of you guys probably don't know what it is. The theory of relativity basically states that time and speed are correlated with each other, right? Which means the faster you travel, the slower time appears for you, right? Up until, as Einstein theorized, up until you hit the speed of light, in which case time stands still. That's why like a photon from the sun has no concept of time. Yeah, so that's kind of the idea of it, is that the faster people travel and the faster anything travels, the slower time will function for them. And this has actually been experimentally proven on Earth. This is probably one of the best arguments you can have for this, is that this is experimentally proven on Earth. If you think of a circle, let's look at a circle. Don't ask why there's a fedora in this room. This is not mine, I promise. But if you think of a circle, this is no, these are justifications for determinism. This is like the time relativity theory justification for it. And so we'll get there in a second. So if you have a circle, right, and the circle is spinning, the outside is spinning a lot faster than the inside is, right? And so how they proved this time relativity theory is they took the Earth as this giant circle. And in the highest mountain on Earth, they put one clock. And in the lowest valley of Earth, they put another clock, right? So as the Earth spins, the clock on the mountain is traveling a lot faster than the clock in the valley is, right? And these were also highly accurate nuclear clocks. But basically what they found is they left them up there and down in that valley for, I believe it was 6 months. And when they came back, they found that the top clock was actually a couple like nanoseconds behind the clock in the valley, right? What this proved to them was that yes, the faster something travels, the slower time actually operates for that being. Okay, this is like an actual like proven fact. It sounds like science fiction. I promise you it's real. And basically, that's what this first justification of determinism comes to say, right? They say they take this theory that the faster something travels, the slower time moves for them. And the argument then being that if you had someone, let's say me, in a spaceship traveling really, really close to the speed of light, right? Super close to the speed of light, and I came right past Earth, and I had my binoculars on me. If I were traveling, well, I would have to be traveling faster than the speed of light. And if I looked down at Earth, since time would be traveling so slow for me and so fast relative to everyone on Earth, I could see people on Earth take an action before they themselves actually took that action. This is like one of the best justifications for it, but it's also one of the most complicated, which is why I'm spending so much time on it. Does that kind of make sense to everyone? Type a one in the chat if you understand how that justifies determinism. Type a two if you do not understand how that justifies determinism. Okay. Couple ones, couple twos. Okay. The argument being is that same with that like spaceship example. If you could see someone take an action before they themselves actually took that action must be predetermined, right? Because they couldn't have done otherwise. You already saw them do it, even though they hadn't taken that action yet. Does that make a little bit more sense to my twos? Hopefully. Uh, hope so. Uh, yeah, I got that. Okay, perfect. But yeah. So does everybody understand roughly time relativity theory and how time relativity theory means determinism is true and how it's like experimentally proven? Put a one if you do understand, put a two if you don't. Mostly ones. Okay, perf. Also, yeah, cool. Also, I'll have like my email at the end. And if you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to email me. Cool. Okay, now let's get to some of the easier justifications. A lot of these justifications will kind of revolve around the idea that, wait, so it's like a time paradox thing. It's less of a paradox. This is actually like this is like actually real life. Like this is not some like debate trick. This is not some like tricky like oh debaters playing with words. Like this is like actual true real life justification that like scientists will argue. That's basically saying that yes, as you accelerate towards and past the speed of light, you will be feeling time at a slower rate than someone not going the speed of light. Therefore, like if someone going faster than the speed of light were able to see someone that's not going the speed of light, they could observe that person taking an action before that person knew they took that action, right? Before they themselves actually took that action. So it's not like a time paradox. It's more like just like science shows us that like you would be able to see things before they actually happen. Does that make sense, Miss Sella? Hopefully, kind of. Yes. Exclamation point. That's what we like to see. Okay. Cool. Now we get into some of the easier arguments. The second one, a lot of these will kind of revolve around the idea that there are like certain rules that govern Earth, right? And that govern the entire universe. And we cannot be exempt from these rules ever, right? So that first one was like time relativity. It's like physics. It's like physics is this rule that governs the universe. What would be some responses to time relativity? So the responses that I have heard are all genuinely pretty bad. Uh, and this is kind of another reason why I really like determinism, is because I think winning that determinism is true is like the easiest part of any debate. For two reasons. One is because if you're the one reading determinism, you will have way more experience debating determinism than anybody else ever will. And two is just because there's not a lot of evidence against a lot of these arguments. They're very similar to like religious arguments. Okay, not to be like controversial or anything, but they're very similar to like religious arguments where they're very easy to prove and very difficult, if not impossible, to disprove. So winning determinism, if you are really trying and really pushing at determinism, you can win determinism as true almost every single round, if not every single round. Uh, yeah, Leah, we'll get into like responses later. Basically, you can't really win against determinism, so you can definitely win. Like I said, I'll get into some responses to determinism. However, I would be comfortable going for determinism against almost any argument. I think determinism is a really, really solid off case position. Uh, and yeah, I mean, obviously, it's possible to win against any argument. Otherwise, everyone would read determinism and win every round. Um, you can, if you win, presumption permissibility flows your side. Yeah, that's a very good answer to it. Like I said, we'll get to answers later. Right now, we're just going like from the determinist debater's side. Uh, okay, let's blitz through some of these other justifications, and then we'll have like a predetermined, predetermined, predetermined questionnaire side. Determinism always negate under truth testing. Okay, all very good questions. Like I said, we'll get to these in a second. We're just going through the justifications right now. Let's see. The other arguments for this are there's one that is like an argument from biology, basically saying that like chemical reactions happen the same way regardless of what you do to them, right? If you take two hydrogen and one oxygen and put them together, they will always, always, always give you one water molecule, right? That doesn't change. There's nothing you can do to change that. There's no way you can put two hydrogen and one oxygen together and not get a water molecule, right? Because chemistry is always the same. Given the same input, chemistry will always yield the same output. Then, what this argument from biology will argue is that our brains are just a series of chemical reactions, right? There is nothing going on inside of our head other than chemical reactions. What this argument from biology will argue is that if you were able to see every chemical reaction going on inside someone's head, you would be able to understand what they would do and what actions they would take before they took those actions, because your brain is just a series of chemical reactions that can't change, right? Regardless of what happens in the outside, your brain will always be bound by the laws of chemistry, right? So you will always have the same output if given the same input. Does that argument make sense to everyone? Give me a one if it makes sense, two if you want me to keep going over the argument from biology. The common author you will hear from that one is Coyne, Coyne. Coyne will be the argument from biology. The argument from time relativity would be Keek-Becken. Let's see. Miss Shepard, look like you don't understand. Do you want to unmute and ask a question, or you could like type a question about the Coyne argument or the biology argument? Just so I'm not like re-explaining things you already understand. Cool. Let's see. Just go over the biology argument again. Yeah, for sure. Basically, in chemistry, right? Chemistry, given the same input, will always yield the same output, right? That was the like hydrogen and oxygen example. Two hydrogen, one oxygen, put them together, they'll always give you one water molecule. There's nothing you can do to change that and make it give you something other than one water molecule. It's impossible. You can't do it. Similarly, your brain is just a series of chemical reactions, right? Therefore, if you knew all of the inputs going into your brain, you could predict what the output would be, because that's how chemistry works, right? Chemistry will always give you the same output when given the same input. It means if we knew all of the inputs into our brain, we could predict the output. Do you think determinism could win policy rounds? Probably not, for the sole reason that policy judges tend to not like weird ethical arguments. Also, a lot of policy rounds will not be surrounding morality, because a lot of them will not use the word ought in the resolution. So generally, most Phil stuff will not be great in policy rounds. You can read it. It is just more difficult to do that. Oh, is that a DM? Oh, whoops. I really don't know. Sorry, guys. I really suck with Zoom. But okay, that is the argument from biology. Uh, if biology justifies determinism, why does a fraction of a second of chemistry mean you vote neg? I want to be so honest, I really do not understand that question. Uh, and these are more like CX questions that we're getting into now, which I would like to slightly hold off on a little bit. Like I said, I promise we will have a section for, okay, really good questions. I'm going to get through a couple more of these justifications, and then I'll kind of blitz through some questions. So that's the argument from biology. You will also see every once in a while this McGinn evidence, which I really like. It's basically saying that like even if determinism is false, right? They're saying if determinism, the determinism debater will say if determinism is true, all of our actions are predetermined. Then the determinism debater can read this McGinn evidence that says, what is it? It's like even if determinism is false, that means that all of your actions, instead of being predetermined, are just random, right? And randomness is no more of a choice, is no more of a decision, is no more of your own volition than it being fully predetermined is. So it's basically like this is all predetermined, but even if it's not, randomness would still disprove morality. I like the McGinn evidence. Fairly easy to answer. But yeah, let's see. Mm, okay, one other question real quick. If you really had to, how would you attempt to apply determinism to a policy round? I didn't know science research and I believe determinism is true and I'm a policy debater. Oh, whoops. Again, this is a direct message. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be reading these out loud. If you really had to, um, again, it would just have to be like proving that morality, that like some sort of morality is what should be deciding the round. And then once you prove that, then you can just read determinism as a reason as to like why morality doesn't exist. Miss Sella said, "Why does randomness disprove morality instead of just proving people aren't consistently moral?" So it's not saying that it disproves morality; it's disproving free will, which will then disprove morality. It's saying people don't have free will. Uh, and yeah, sorry if this. I'm just now realizing this might be kind of a confusing way to have it presented. A lot of the times, the arguments that determinism debaters will make is that this is determinism, and then it will say determinism will disprove free will, and it basically takes out the like culpability argument of like a metaethical on like a metaethical standpoint, right? So if you were to take metaethics, you need your framework to hold people morally culpable in order to have like some sort of moral justification. Um, Therefore, if people are just predetermined to take their action, then they have no free will, and thus they can't be held culpable because, like I was saying earlier, they're just like a product of their environment. Um, if that makes sense. So I'm trying to like get through these while also answering questions. Let's see. That was the indeterminism argument. There's also this like Lavaza evidence. Lavaza, really not a great argument, but it will basically say that like our brains will choose an answer to a question before we as conscious beings know the answer to that question, right? So for example, if I'm like trying to decide whether or not I'm going to go pick up my phone, the Lavaza evidence is like your brain tells you to go pick up your phone before you as a conscious experience understand that you're going to go pick up your phone. Therefore, like you are really just like a meat sack being controlled by a brain that you have no control over because you don't control the laws of chemistry. Again, a slightly more complex one. And yeah, the last kind of justification we'll go over is the Horn evidence, Horne. Horn will give you another argument from like physics, basically saying that like the universe is a closed system. If you guys are familiar with any sort of like electrical engineering, or just like any sort of like physics slash maybe chemistry as well, closed systems are things that cannot have energy added to them and cannot have energy taken away from them, right? Because all that energy stays in this closed system. If you have a closed system, then all energy has to stay constant. That's like one of Newton's laws. I don't know. I've been out of physics for a while. But yeah, one of Newton's laws, I'm pretty sure, is like energy can never be created nor destroyed, right? And that is kind of what the Horn evidence says, is like if energy can't be created or destroyed, then it's impossible for us to like step outside of this like worldly experience and have some sort of actual conscious experience, because any sort of conscious experience would necessitate adding or taking away some level of energy, because we can only move like as much energy as we have. Again, the Horn evidence is like also not fantastic. Most rounds you will probably be going for the Keek-Becken evidence, being that time relativity argument, or that coin evidence, being that biology argument. Or McGinn. I went for McGinn a fair amount. Cool. Does everyone generally understand like how to justify determinism, how to take it into a round? Oh wait, whoops. Type one if you do understand generally. Type two if you do not. Okay, a lot of ones. That looks good. Okay. Let me double check, make sure. Does anyone know if this goes till 1:30 or 1:45? I look, you forgot. 1:45? Okay, perfect. That's huge. Okay, cool. Now we'll get into some well, we'll get into some other ways to debate it. So yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, one of the best ways to debate determinism is basically arguing that determinism proves free will doesn't exist and thus can't hold agents morally culpable, right? Then the argument you will make is that if agents can't be held, does everyone know what culpable means? Put a two in the chat if you don't know what culpable means. If everyone knows, just don't type anything. If you don't know what the word culpable means, type two. Okay, got a couple of twos, got a 1.6. Okay. Culpable means that you can be held like it's like accountability, right? It's saying whether or not you can be held like accountable for the actions that you take, right? From a meta-ethical standpoint, if you can be held accountable for the actions, then you can be held culpable. It's like the same thing. The only difference is like accountability in this sense is more abstract than accountability that you guys have probably heard. Culpability just means that like your action can be tied to your agent. Okay. So basically it's like then the argument the determinist debaters will make will be like, well, if everything is predetermined and their actions were predetermined, that action can't be tied to that agent because that action was predetermined. The agent didn't choose to take that action. That action was just in the universe, predetermined to happen. Therefore, like that agent can't be culpable for that action. That maybe make a little bit more sense to some of my twos. Everyone know what culpable means and kind of how determinism did. Okay, if you understand what culpability is, put a one. It is like this. Culpable, I think. Spelling is not my strong suit. Okay. A lot of people with ones. Hopefully that's all bueno. Perf. Okay. Yeah, so now there's kind of two ways you can debate determinism. Number one is just going for like it disproves morality, therefore, and like go like a trickier route with it, being like, I'm predetermined to win, or like, therefore, like this debate is predetermined to be over. Therefore, like the status quo is metaethically true. Do not read those arguments. Those arguments are bad arguments. You will never win against a good debater reading those arguments. Those arguments will crush bad debaters, and you'll sit there and point and laugh, go, haha, you're so bad. And then you'll hit a good debater, and they'll crush you reading those arguments, and you'll cry, and they'll sit there and laugh at you and go, haha, you're so bad. Because those are bad arguments. Do not read those arguments, okay? Arguments you should be reading as a determinist debater is you want to be reading determinism triggers presumption or permissibility. Does type of one in the chat if you know what presumption and permissibility are when they come to debate. Type a two in the chat if you do not understand or know what presumption and permissibility are when they come to debate. Okay, a couple twos, mostly ones. We'll give like a quick explanation to help out my twos a little bit. Basically, what uh, presumption and permissibility are like judge instruction type arguments. They're basically telling the judge, hey, judge, if this were to happen, here's how you should vote, right? Presumption is if there is no offense in the round at all, right? I'm hoping everyone knows what offense is. If there's no offense in the round at all, here's how you should vote, right? Because if there's no offensive reason to vote AF or neg. Just saying in the absence of offense, you should still vote this way. Okay? Permissibility is the same thing, but with moral frameworks, right? So it's in the absence of a moral framework, here's how you should vote, right? If there's no moral framework, vote this way. Okay? That's what presumption and permissibility are. And those are more like theoretical arguments. So, like theory arguments as to why they should vote one way in the absence of offense. They'll make theoretical arguments as to why they should vote one way in the absence of a moral framework. That is really how you should be reading determinism, is reading it as determinism disproves free will. No free will means no morality. Therefore, no morality triggers presumption or permissibility, and then going through the presumption permissibility debate, right? Very similar to how I was saying earlier, that if you read determinism, you will have more experience debating determinism than almost anyone on the circuit, and then you'll crush them. Similarly, with presumption and permissibility, if you read presumption and permissibility quite a bit, you'll have more experience reading presumption and permissibility than most people on the circuit, and you'll crush them on the presumption and permissibility debate. Most people reading P and P, as I call it, most people reading P and P will only really understand like the surface level read off of a doc arguments of presumption permissibility. It means if you can answer these off the doc arguments that are read the exact same every single goddamn time, every single time they'll be the exact same. If you can answer that first argument, you basically win the debate. I mean, it's really sad watching good debaters debate presumption permissibility because you're like, dog, how do you not understand this at a deeper level? But anyways, not to talk too much smack. Cool. Let's run through some of the answers to determinism. For starters, does everyone understand like how to read it and trigger presumption permissibility? How to go for determinism that way? Type of 1 if you understand. Type of 2 if you do not. Lots of ones. Cool. That means I'm hopefully doing my job well. Fingers crossed. Cool. So let's run through some of the answers to determinism. The number one answer you will hear every single time in a determinism round, every single round you will ever debate reading determinism, the first CX question will be some crazy bullshit like, so is the Holocaust bad? So is 9/11 bad? And you'll have to sit there and you'll be like, But if you know how to answer it, it's really not that big of a deal. You should never lose the determinism allows atrocities. Because every single round you will ever debate determinism is the first CX question, I guarantee it, will be, so is 9/11 bad? Right? It'll be some shit like that. So, pardon my French. But yeah, the argument you want to go for with this, the argument that I have gone with basically my entire career and what I kind of instruct people to still do now, is the argument that determinism makes isn't that good and bad don't exist, right? The argument determinism makes is that moral implications of those don't exist, right? So for example, you could look at horrible atrocities like the Holocaust, like 9/11, like Mao Zedong, like, all these horrible leaders and say, yes, all of those things were bad. When I look at them, I feel bad. When I talk about them, I feel horrible. The argument that determinism makes is that just morality as a whole does not exist. Like good and bad can exist without moral obligation. Yes, that is exactly the argument, right? Because even still, regardless of whether or not moral obligations exist, when I eat a chocolate bar, I feel good, right? So you can't deny that good and bad exist. The argument that you're going to want to go with is just because good and bad exist doesn't mean there are moral implications to good or bad. For example, when a meth head shoots up meth, right? They're going to feel really good. Does that mean that meth is really good? No, obviously not, right? So just because things are good and bad doesn't mean that there are moral implications. Is-ought gap. Yes, it is very similar, if not the exact same argument as the is-ought gap. I was just trying to put it in like slightly simpler terms. Um, but yeah, the is-ought gap is like basically the argument you want to go with. Um, yeah, atrocities, other arguments with atrocities that you can go with if you really want to just like hold the line at atrocities, is straight up if they're like, is the Holocaust bad? You just be like, I don't know. I don't know. In all fairness, never do this if you have like a K judge, if you have any judge that's gonna vote on like anything normal, probably don't do this. I would only ever do this in front of like a tricks judge or like a theory judge. Um, is you just be like, I don't know. Because then what they'll go with is they'll be like, you're justifying atrocities, atrocities bad, right? And then you're gonna sit there and you're gonna go, well, if determinism is true, the answer I gave was also true, right? If I'm winning determinism, you can't vote on this because the answer I gave was true. I don't know if it's good or bad. Again, don't do that in front of any normal judge. Only do that in front of a tricks or theory judge. Can it be leveraged if you're a util debater by just saying if pleasure and pain are real leverage on epistemic modesty? Yes. Yes, definitely can be. However, uh, yeah, I've very rarely seen rounds one going for epistemic modesty against determinism. Just because, I don't know. Personally, I don't think epistemic modesty is a very good argument in general. Um, but it could definitely be leveraged, and definitely could be an argument you go for. The determinism debater is always just going to be like, well, it's going to be the thing I just said. It's like, if it's true, you're wrong, right? And there is no epistemic modesty because you're just wrong. Um, if that kind of makes sense. Uh, but yeah, could be leveraged. I still think a good determinism debater will probably answer that pretty well. Another one you will see quite a bit when it comes to answers to determinism is one you will hear. It is Pascal's wager. Pascal's wager, very fun argument, originated from old philosopher Pascal, talking about religion actually. But Pascal's wager basically builds this like box, right? If you guys have ever done like Punnett squares, builds the same type of box as a Punnett square. And so it'll basically say if morality is not real, right? And we try to act morally, right? Best case scenario, we're acting morally. That's good. Worst case scenario, there's no morality and it's neutral. So if we're trying to act morally, it can only be good or neutral. If we don't care about morality and determinism is, and determinism is true, and sorry, if we don't care about morality, either we're going to be acting immorally if morality does exist, or it's going to be neutral if determinism is true, right? So the argument from Pascal's wager is that there are only benefits to trying to act morally. I know that was a lot, and I, again, don't really have anything written out. Type of 1 if you guys generally understand Pascal's wager, and a 2 if you don't. Okay, looks like it's about 50-50, so we'll spend a little bit of time on it. Yeah. Basically, it's saying that there's basically 2 options on either side, right? So there's morality exists, morality does not exist. Or sorry, it's we try and act morally, we don't try and act morally on this side. And up here, it's determinism is false, determinism is true, right? If determinism is false and we try to act morally, then it's neutral. Or sorry, then it's good, right? Because we're trying to act morally and determinism is false. So it's good, right? We're acting morally and morality is true. if determinism is false and we're trying to, or sorry, if determinism is true and we're trying to act morally, then it's neutral because determinism is true, it doesn't matter, right? If we don't try and act morally and determinism is true, again, it's going to be neutral. But if determinism is false and we don't try and act morally, it's going to be bad because we're not trying to act morally. So if everyone kind of understands that, then the argument that a person reading Pascal's wager will say is that regardless of if determinism is true or not, we should still try to act morally because best case scenario, it's good. Worst case scenario, it's neutral. Whereas not trying to act morally, best case scenario, it's neutral. Worst case scenario, it's bad. Does that make sense generally, kind of? Do like the 1 and 2 thing again, if that makes sense. Type of 1. If that doesn't make sense, give me a 2. Okay. A lot more 1s this time around. Bang. Okay. Looks like we're better on Pascal's wager. And Pascal's wager seems like a very good argument on face. However, it's really not. It's going to be the quickest argument to answer because the question of Pascal's wager is always just going to be which moral theory do we try and act moral under, right? Because think of it this way. If you're trying to act morally and util is true, right? And we're trying to act morally under util, and let's say we do like the common CX question of like, should you enslave 100 people to set free 1,000 people? Util would say, yes, that's absolutely, we should do that. Therefore, trying to act morally under util would be enslaving 100 people to set 1,000 people free. However, under Kant, acting morally would be not enslaving 100 people because Kant would say we should never enslave people, right? So those two moral theories will give you two different answers. Therefore, when it comes to Pascal's wager and they say, well, we should try to act morally, how do we try and act morally if we don't know which moral theory is true, right? There's thousands of different moral theories. Trying to act morally under one might actually be acting immorally under whatever is metaethically true. Cool. Does everyone understand how to answer Pascal's wager? Give me a 1 if you do. Give me a 2 if you do not. It's basically just like what moral theory is true. Also, a little fun factoid on Pascal's wager. This is actually the same argument that atheists use against Pascal, because they'll say it begs the question of which religion is true. Cool. Let's go. Okay, other arguments. Compatibilism, another very strong argument against determinism. Basically, compatibilism will argue that like whether or not determinism is true. It's like like the thing about Kant I was telling you guys about earlier. They'll say whether or not determinism is true, we can still have moral theories that function, right? So like the Kant debate, or like what Kant was saying earlier, is like even if determinism is true, that just means morality must begin a priori, right? And we can still evaluate states of affairs that way. Compatibilism will just say, regardless of whether or not determinism is true, we can still have moral theories, right? Basically the same way as like if you were reading a book, even though the book will end the same way every time, even though Harry Potter ends the same way every time, I can still tell you Voldemort's bad, even though Harry Potter ends the same way every single time, right? Even though the book is predetermined, I can still tell you Voldemort's a bad guy, right? That's basically what compatibilism will say. That it's like, even if the world is predetermined, we can still say this is a good action, this is a bad action, because we know, because we have like these a priori ethical theories. So that's like compatibilism, what compatibilism will say. The determinist answer to compatibilism will basically be something along the lines of like, yes, you might be able to say actions are good or bad, but you can't tie those to agents, right? So if you can say an action is good or bad, you can't tie that to an agent and say that agent is acting morally or immorally. And then you will argue that morality has to be agential, or that there has to be an agent involved for morality to exist. For example, when a volcano explodes, you don't say a volcano exploding and killing 200 people is morally bad. You don't say, oh, that volcano, he's a morally bad guy, because a volcano is not an agent, right? In that same way, if someone is predetermined to take a bad action, You can't say that person is good or bad because they were predetermined to. The same way a volcano is predetermined to explode. Uh, cool. Yeah, how much time do we got? Yeah, like 20 minutes. Cool. Yeah, those are a couple other answers. We'll do a little bit of questions at the end. I'm gonna get to like two little fun, kind of trickier arguments you can read with determinism. And then we'll do questions. How does that answer compatibilism? Because compatibilism will say that you're talking about the thing I just said, presumably. Let's see, because compatibilism will say that like, sorry. The argument you're making is that morality is still impossible because morality must be agential. You make this like extra meta-ethical argument, saying like morality has to be tied to an agent, right? Therefore, evaluating states of affairs doesn't give you a moral statement. Okay, so evaluating a state of affairs, for example, with the volcano example, you can evaluate the state of affairs after the volcano exploded and be like, yeah, that was really bad. But you can't say morally it was a bad action because morality requires an agent, right? A volcano is not an agent. Therefore, you can't tie that bad action to that volcano, right? And so you can't make a moral statement about a volcano exploding. Similarly, with that same meta-ethical argument of morality must be agential, if determinism is true and there is no free will, then actions cannot be tied to agents because all these actions are predetermined absent the agent. Does that kind of make sense? So morality applies badness to an agent, but goodness, badness can exist absent morality. Yes. Yeah, basically, that's basically like the thesis of determinism. Is like you can have good and bad things, right? When I eat a chocolate bar, that's good. I feel good. I feel nice and happy. However, if I only eat chocolate bars, I'm going to get fat and ugly and obese and throw up and die and get diabetes and have a heart attack and die, right? That's not good, right? So just because eating chocolate makes me feel good doesn't mean that it's necessarily good. You'd call that a prescription of goodness. Good, but not the a lot of like Wittgenstein stuff with like the good versus the absolute good. Uh, yeah. So yes, that is kind of like the thesis of morality. Um, yeah, okay, cool. Let's get to some other like fun stuff and then we'll do like 10, 15 minutes of questions at the end. We got time. Fun stuff. Fun arguments you can do with determinism. One of my like all-time favorites is determinism takes out theory. Okay. Basically, this is a very simple argument where basically, if you're reading determinism and you're winning the determinism page, and someone is crushing you on a theory page, you basically, yeah, you basically just want to sit there and be like, I was predetermined to make this theory violation. It wasn't me, therefore you shouldn't vote against me for it. Because it was an action that was predetermined, right? Therefore, like theory is voting me down because I did something bad. You're saying, well, you shouldn't vote me down because the action was bad, because I was predetermined to take that action. I literally could not have done otherwise. Which is really funny when like the theory debater will then sit there and you're like forcing a theory debater into an argument about metaethics and they flounder because it's really funny. Um, Another like fun argument you can do with determinism is if you're reading the like coin evidence, the like biology arguments, if you're reading a lot of like the physics arguments, a lot of them will say things like everything interacts with everything else, right? So for example, even though I'm not directly touching these paintings and this TV and these suitcases in this room, I'm still affecting them by being here, right? My air is hitting them, particles are hitting them, yada, yada, yada. So if everything interacts with everything else and is causally predetermined by everything else, then everything is constantly interconnected, right? A lot of you guys might not have even ever heard this argument before, but it's an argument called monoism, which basically says like everything is one thing, right? Because if you think about it, what's the difference between me and this computer? right? Where do you draw the line as to what's me and what's this computer? Because at the end of the day, there's particles in me, there's particles touching me, there's particles touching those particles, even if they're air particles, that go all the way, all the way, all the way, all the way, all the way into this computer, right? So where do you draw the line as to what's me and what's the computer if we're all connected, right? We're all interacting with each other, right? This computer could not have pulled up this Zoom call without me interacting with it. The argument then is that like any line drawn between agents is arbitrary, because it just like begs the question as to where does an agent start and end? Where do different things start and end? And that's like determinism triggers monoism, which is a really fun argument to like read and go for. Uh, and I think I've won twice on that argument, and both times it's really funny because it's like a new 1AR or 2NR argument, and they're just sitting there like, but yeah, okay. Those are like my two little fun tidbits for you guys. Do we have any other questions? We'll do like 10 minutes of questions, like 12. Let's see. Okay. So we had what's the strategy advantage of going to for monoism? How do you leverage it? What's strategic about winning monoism? What's strategic about winning monoism is you basically get to skirt around the entire determinism debate as a whole, right? Because now, let's say you went for like determinism triggers presumption of permissibility, triggers this, and you're getting hit on like two or three of these arguments. You're gonna be like, yeah, actually, we'll just like concede determinism is false, and we'll just go for monoism instead, and then kind of jump the line to monoism triggers like presumption of permissibility, right? So basically, if you're getting fought a lot on like whether or not determinism triggers presumption of permissibility, you'd be like, well, regardless of if determinism does, monoism does. Well, look at this guy, right? And just whip. Okay, pause. I was about to say you just whip it out at the very end, but you can just like, whip a new argument out, and then your opponent's like, what? Where'd this argument come from? But it's on the judge's flow, so it's like it's not a new 2NR argument. It's an argument you made in the 1NC, that like everything interacts with everything else. And yeah, you can basically just like skip over the whole determinism debate and go for monoism. And also the strategic benefit is it's funny as hell. So why not? Let's see. Can you unpack winning on this round is already over? Do Ks or KFs and determinism interact in different ways? I really don't know what you mean by winning on this round is already over. Um, yeah, I'm not super sure what you mean by that. Something like that. Okay, well, I'll go with the Ks and KFs in determinism, and then we'll get to like the tricky ways. Um, Ks and KFs are like the one case position where I would say maybe don't go for determinism. And the reason I say this is different than what you probably think. Um, it's not actually because I don't think determinism is good against a critique. I think, like in an abstract sense, determinism and a critique could have a very good debate. The reason I say do not read determinism against a critique is because 99% of the time, if your opponent is reading a critique, that means the judge is a critique judge. They're a K judge that likes critiques. That means they are way more likely to vote on this, like, does determinism mean slavery was okay? And more importantly, when they read, let's say, like settler colonialism, their first cross-examination question, instead of being like, oh, so is the Holocaust bad? They'll be like, oh, so is settler colonialism bad? And now they have a rock hard, okay, pause. They have like a very strong link straight into their critique. And they'll get a really good link out of you from CX. And it's like very hard to dodge that link. And then you're going to have to like battle this like weird link debate against a judge that is going to be unlikely to evaluate determinism in the first place. So I would say probably don't read determinism against a critique. Let's see, what was the other question? This round is already over. Yeah. So those tricky ways, they are really only ever good if your opponent doesn't answer them. Long story short, don't read those arguments against good debaters because a good debater will answer them and then we'll probably read theory on them. Right. And then you're going to be like, oh shit, well, now I've got to answer theory and I've got to answer these arguments and I've got to answer all this. And it's just going to put you in a real bad mood and you're going to suck. So basically, you don't really want to be doing that. However, against bad debaters, yeah, you can always just throw in like one of the very common ones from the negative side. As a negative debater, a lot of them will say, since the negative most of the time will be defending the status quo, they will say that determinism means that the status quo is, if you read determinism with truth testing, they'll be like the status quo is metaethically true because it's predetermined to be the status quo, right? There is only one line of time, and that is the status quo. It means the status quo is metaethically true, therefore you like auto negate. Again, that argument is only good if they don't answer it. If they spend 0.5 seconds on it being like, this is stupid, most judges will be like, yeah, you're right, that's stupid. I'm not voting on it. How does monoism trigger permissibility? So monoism triggers permissibility in a very similar way to how determinism triggers permissibility, being this like agent argument. If morality has to be agential, i.e., like it has to be connected to an agent, monoism says there is no such thing as like an agent, an actor. There are none of these things. There is just one conglomerate thing that is the universe, right? We are all just the universe experiencing itself. Okay. Therefore, if we are all just the universe experiencing itself, then there is no such thing as an agent or an actor because we're all one thing, right? We're all one agent. Does the fact the res is USFG take that out because it's not really an agent? No, the argument is just like that the USFG or like the United States federal government is still like an actor in even though it's not an agent, it is an actor in the moral sense. So, for example, if the government as a whole, right, they vote on something and then it takes effect, if that effect is bad, you can say, wow, the government is bad, right? So even though it's not an agent in the sense that it's not like an individual, it is still a moral actor. And so it still takes action as a conglomerate, and therefore it's still a moral actor. Yeah, got any other questions? Any other like we do like CX style questions if you want, and you can just like see how I answer them.
Wait, I have like three questions about determinism.
Yeah, for sure. Miss Sun, is that you?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go.
First, like one and C construction, like is it like good with like any argument in one and C? Do you have like specific like one and C's that you think it's good with?
Yeah, no, great question. Good one and C construction. Typically, if you're reading, so I would prefer it with like what most people would consider like a tricky one and C, which like I don't really like that term, but we'll go with it. Basically, other things like truth testing, like theory. I think theory with determinism is really good. Um, you can read it with theory. You can read it you can read it with like counterplans, disads, anything like that. The only thing you have to keep in mind with those is those counterplans and disads have to be under their framework, obviously, right? So you can read it as like if they're reading util and you're reading determinism, you can read this whole determinism page and then read a counterplan that solves their case, right? It solves for like the util side of things. Um, and then like, yeah, when you get to the determinism page, you'd obviously either end up going for the counterplan or for determinism. You wouldn't really want to go for both, just because like one would be disproving the other. However, I have gone for both, like once at least that I can remember. Although in all fairness, it was not a very good round. But basically, the argument you end up making is basically like the counterplane is true, or like the disad is true, right? But even if it's not, morality doesn't exist, and then go to presumption permissibility. The only downside to that is you're going to be splitting yourself really hard. you really only want to do that if they've like basically conceded determinism, um, because you really just want to spend time there on the presumption permissibility debate. Generally, I would not recommend that. But yes, 1NC construction, I would say really good with theory, um, good with like other like tricky sort of arguments. Obviously, not very good with like ethical arguments, like framework and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, I would say generally determinism is pretty good if you're reading like anywhere from like 3 to 5 off,
Okay.
because determinism is just like a cute little off you can just like sneak in there.
Okay. Cool. Also, in your 2NR, like, do you recommend just like 7 or 6 minutes of determinism? Like, should you like upload it to everything else in the round, or should you like still enter case and then like still go for like another off?
Yeah, really good question again. So basically, what I tend to do is obviously not like, well, not obviously, I guess, is not like you don't want to just sit there for 6 minutes on determinism, because that's going to make their 2AR way too easy, right? You want to make their 2AR as hard as possible, and sitting there for 6 minutes on just the determinism page, their 2AR is going to be like, it's all going to be determinism. And you don't want to give them 3 minutes to answer determinism. So what you want to do is you want to do determinism, and then typically I would go for like case and case turns, because I think those like pair really well with a like determinism 2NR. But I would say you want to like try and split them, and still make them cover case, and then possibly like one other position. However, I think if you were to split it like 3-4, like 4 minutes on determinism, 3 minutes on case, uh, whoa, 3-3 is what I meant to say. Um, 3 minutes on determinism, 3 minutes on case. I think that's going to make their 2AR really difficult. They're going to have to beat back determinism, win their moral theory, and then win some sort of offense under it. Because then in the 2NR, you can sit there and be like even if they're winning, their moral theory is true. If they're not winning offense under that moral theory, vote on presumption, right? Vote on permissibility, which are arguments that you better be winning if you're going for it in the 2NR. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. I forgot my third question, but that.
No, you're all good. Looks like I got some other ones in the chat. Is determinism plus theory shells a viable strategy? Determinism and T. Yes, no, absolutely. I would say determinism and theory plus, or like determinism and T, are probably like, it's probably like my go-to strategy. I would say like determinism. Uh, you can even go for like truth testing and some other like weird truth testing garbage. But no, I would definitely say like determinism and theory, determinism and T, determinism and a reps K, determinism and like other like generic type of stuff is typically pretty good. Determinism pairs really well with like generics. Um, Personally, I am like not the biggest fan of T. I literally never read T my whole career, because I just thought it was annoying and boring and I didn't want to read it. Um, but you definitely can. Do you have any resources, links you could send or recommend? Yes. So there's obviously a bunch of stuff on the wiki. Um, I would love to send you guys my determinism file, but I think if Rihanna or Leah is still in the room, I believe it's the same file that the Woodlands still uses whenever they read determinism. So I don't really just want to like out the Woodlands like that. But like resources, links, literally just Google determinism. You'll find like Coin, Kickback pretty quickly. Um, Alternatively, who reads determinism a lot? I know Dupree per so someone from Lake Highland Prep reads determinism a lot, and they're debating this year. There's also Sebastian, someone that's not very helpful from NFU that debated in like 2020. That read determinism a lot. Basically, I would just like farm the wiki for determinism. Uh, would be the best determinism warrants to hide in a Kant framework. I still think like determinism proves morality is a priori is like the best way to read it because you don't really have to hide it in a framework. You just read it as a framework justification. Um, and you basically would just want to write it in such a way that they will answer the justification without answering the warrant. So like must begin a priori. You can even do like determinism means like the omnilateral will something. What would what? Oh, whoops. What would you read theory on if you were to do that? I'm not really sure. Yeah, just like anything. Uh, okay. I think we got that thing. Fake, there are four Woodlands people in here. Oh yeah, Pratik Celia. Yeah, Lake Highland PS. He reads a lot of determinism. You can farm his wiki for it. He definitely has like Keep Back in McGinn on there. There's four Woodlands people in here? What the hell? Am I stupid? No, there is not. Oh, lying to me. I swear. Anyways, but yeah, okay, cool. It looks like we are a little bit out of time. However, if you guys have any other questions, would like to talk to me, and get coached by me, I guess. I've coached like people in the past. Talk to me, ask me determinism questions. I fly planes. If you want to talk about planes, feel free. DM me on Slack. I'll put my email in my debate email in here as well. Uh, if you guys want to email me, I would love to talk to you guys. I love debate. I love teaching. So feel free to reach out to me at any point. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free. And I do judge occasionally. So hopefully I'll see some of you guys on the circuit or see you guys around. Anyone have any last minute questions before we go? I'm not really sure what y'all's schedule looks like today. So I'm not sure if we can stay late or not. But yeah, I think that kind of concludes the determinism lecture. Y'all are free to go if you want, or you can sit here and ask questions. Bye, guys. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. Wait, can you send the file, by the way?
Send what file?
The determinism.
Yeah, well, no, like I was saying, I'm pretty sure that's the same file that the Woodlands still uses. So I don't really want to just like send that and
That
out the
was
Woodlands.
crazy. That's-
However,
we're chill.
uh, yeah. Like I said, we'll definitely farm Pratik Sila's wiki from Lake Highland Prep. You can also just like troll the wiki. There's only like 8 determinism arguments, so you can find them all pretty quickly.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Word. For sure. Thank you.
I'm gonna ask my opponent for disclosure now. All right. See you.
Yeah, you're good. Oh shoot.